Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, February 5th. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see a confused pattern. 19-foot seas on the dateline, sort of aimed at Hawaii. Another bits and pockets of seas in the 18 to 20-foot range, but nothing really organized, nothing suggestive of even mid-period swell in the water. Let's get into the details. We'll start this week's tour looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when they do form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet, sort of like what is occurring here, but that's not a real dip. You want it digging down further. Regardless, we have a pretty healthy jet stream flow. Winds 200 knots in one little pocket here approaching the dateline, and solid and consolidated the whole way from Japan to a point north of Hawaii. That is supportive of gale development. Then we have a bit of a split pattern going on here off of the U.S. West Coast with the northern branch. Well, actually, you see what used to be a split right in this area, the remnants of that tracking north here, but that's all but cut off now. But still, there's a bit of a split going on off the U.S. West Coast with the northern branch sort of going into Oregon, kind of pushing up into Canada, and fragments working their way down just east of Hawaii, down towards the equator. So kind of a confused mess over here. But back here, things definitely look supportive of gale development. Let's roll this out. And we move into Monday. We see a better defined trough trying to dig out, but still notice a little bit of energy here just being stolen off, tracking backwards against the jet. Another trough developing off Japan on Monday night. And then we'll roll this out even further. Consolidated energy also pushing into the U.S. West Coast Monday night into Tuesday. Now we lose a little bit of energy, wind energy here. Winds down to 170, 160 knots, 150 knots in pockets, but still consolidated, pushing well to the south down here about 33 south over the width of the Pacific. A very well-developed flow, and not unexpected given this time of year. Then we have a pretty good trough here, right here pushing off of Japan into Tuesday and Wednesday. Another trough developing in the Gulf of Alaska on Wednesday. That supports counterclockwise flow, both there and there aloft and down at the surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure. Of course, low pressure generates winds, and winds generate seas. Seas, when they radiate away from the fetch area and arrive at your coast, create surf. Okay, anyway, rolling on out, we see the trough in the Gulf moving up into towards Canada by Thursday, and the trough that was off Japan sort of washing out and just flattening out some, and then redeveloping again on Friday. Another healthy bit of wind energy starts pushing 190 knots off Japan then. But notice we got kind of a split flow again starting to develop north of Hawaii here and becoming more pronounced into Saturday, but winds build to 200 knots. So basically what this suggests in our mind is that the active phase of the MJO is moving in, confined to the West Pacific, and typically the jet stream rages wherever the active phase of the MJO is, okay? And so it would be, let's say, right around, there's New Guinea there, and we get into the MJO portion, you'll see, or at least that's the guess, is that some active phase of the MJO about a week out is somewhere down in this area. That feeds the jet stream, but then as it moves off to the east, there is probably more inactive activity over here, and that causes the jet to fall apart, causing the split, and then thereby confining most of the swell-producing storm energy to the western half of the Pacific. Now, that does not say that there isn't some sort of weather activity here, but just not organized in terms of generating wind relative to producing swell. Still, rain for California possible. We'll get into that in a little bit. Anyway, roll this out into Sunday, and again, the pattern continues. The split point right here north of Hawaii into 180 hours out. A little bit of a backdoor trough, possibly pushing off California on a week out. Maybe some cold air associated with that. Hard to tell. Anyway, jet stream looking pretty good in the West Pacific for the coming week. Let's get into for more details down at the surface. So here we go. Surface level pressure, surface level winds, a broad low pressure area, but kind of not very organized. Sort of a core here in the western Gulf, kind of a core here over the northern dateline region. Just, not consolidated, not organized. And again, the jet stream is good here, but not really dug out in a trough, just kind of a broad sort of thing going on. So there's no fetch. Really, 25, barely 30 knot winds right there. That's it. not a whole lot to produce swell of any interest. And a little bit of a low here, California, Central California, Northern California, getting some rain this Sunday evening and snow into the mountains of the Sierra yet again. 1 day break and back at it. That's the hallmark of this winter season so far, and that's not a bad pattern. Anyway, so we're rolling out into Monday. A little bit more organized low pressure here on the dateline, or a little bit east of the dateline, targeting Hawaii, 35 knot winds. Low develops, or a gale develops off of northern Japan, 40, 45, 50 knot winds here. We'll roll this out, see what happens. That pushes, both systems push off to the east. This one low just doesn't really organize. 30, 35 knot winds to Hawaii. That's good for like 13-second period swell, but not a whole lot more than that. This system over here was doing better. Probably we'll see. It's the wind speeds over duration that really dictate the period of a swell. 50 knot winds is what you really want to see for a good 17, 18-second period swell. Anyway, so we're into Thursday. Notice there's a lot of fetch here on the south side of this system come Wednesday night into Thursday, but not a whole lot back here. 30 knot winds pushing towards California. Maybe a little bit of wind swell with that. We'll just keep rolling this out again. Now notice, look at this right here. Remember, we saw the jet stream raging to here, splitting, and there's high pressure between the two flows of the jet, the split jet. That's what one would expect to see, sort of a brick wall defining where the edge of the high energy in the jet terminates, and all the activity, gale activity, is behind that. Roll this out, and you see pretty good fetch here. Again, 35 knot fetch, 30 knot over a broad area northwest of Hawaii. Certainly some swell should result from that. Oops, there we go. And so we're a week out. Low pressure basically filling 2/3 the North Pacific, but not super organized, again, because the trough factor, there's not a lot of troughiness in the jet. It's a zonal flow, just flat west to east. So that's not super conducive for storm development, but certainly good enough to produce some fetch and some surf. Okay, let's go take a look at the wave model. So here we go, 18Z Sunday, as we said, 18, maybe 19-foot seas here on the dateline, sort of targeting Hawaii. It's good for maybe 11 or 12-second period swell. Nothing too impressive. Then it builds a little bit, come into Monday, and see it will pop. See if we can get the control to disappear. There you go. 20-foot seas building. That's good for 13-second period swell pushing into Hawaii. And then the system develops off Japan with, 32-foot seas or so, 33 feet come Tuesday morning, and 22, 24-foot seas maybe north of Hawaii, so maybe 14-second period swell to result out of that. And then both systems pushing off to the east, not really so much impacting Hawaii anymore. This system, 30-foot seas approaching the dateline, targeting Hawaii pretty well, but then it pretty much fades out. And then we're back into this kind of a funky pattern where things just aren't super centralized and organized. Then we get into Friday. Friday night, 38-foot seas over a tiny little area. Still, that's good for some small, maybe 17, 18-second period swell for Hawaii if it develops as forecast. Rolling that out, that system makes it to the dateline. Again, this whole issue with the jet, the split in the jet, the MJO, as we expect down here, and then not a whole lot going on in the East Pacific. Target really becomes Hawaii for this activity, for swell activity. And there we go. We were at 180 hours, and this really sums it up. There's this brick wall right at 150 west, all the activities behind there, kind of a slack pattern off to the east. That's not to say that swell energy will not radiate towards California. It certainly will, but it's a pretty good travel distance. You're looking at 1,600 nautical miles from there to here. A lot of swell decay in that process. And so smaller energy, but a little bit of period to it. Something to ride. But the main focus of the larger energy will be Hawaii for the coming week. And while we're at it, we'll do a quick weather forecast for California, particularly snow is what we're interested in. This is the 18Z, as of 18Z Sunday, so that's about 10 a.m. Local time. Anyway, low pressure winding up off the coast, and as of right now this evening, it is impacting certainly in the San Francisco area. A little bit of rain working its way into the mountains as well. That's supposed to turn into snow supposedly per the models by about 10 p.m., but already chain controls are up on 80. There is snow over the peak. Pretty high snow levels, though. We did check temperature gauges at Squaw. It was down to 28 at the valley floor as of just a few minutes ago, but it was up to 40 degrees at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, so temperatures have dropped significantly in just the past couple of hours. That's good. You can see the yellows and the whites here. That is snow for the Sierra all the way down, it looks like, into the Mammoth area as well. That system will blow out come Monday night, but now reinforcements scheduled to arrive come Monday night into Tuesday. More snow, looking quite heavy actually by midday Tuesday into Tuesday night, then fading out on Wednesday, and then more energy spinning off of this system here in the Gulf of Alaska. But notice now, just little tiny, this white and the gray, little bits of snow. That's considered very high snow levels. There's Tahoe there. It's all in rain, and it looks like rain and then something going on maybe Thursday, Friday, more snow, and then snow into maybe almost Saturday morning. Then high pressure, 1030 millibar high, builds in and locks things down, and things dry up after that. And then here is our wall and our border here between the wet and the stormy and the dry. Then a quick look at snow for the Tahoe region. We notice here we have wherever the dots are, the orange dots, these are where we're building accumulation data. Squaw, Sugar Bowl, North Star, Heavenly, Kirkwood, Bear Valley. They're identified here. We'll roll this out. This is the 12Z run of the model. The 18Z is running right now. It'll post shortly. Anyway, and this is in 3-hour increments. It only goes out to 84 hours. So by 7 p.m. Sunday, the snow is supposed to be coming up 80, and that's pretty much exactly what's going on by 10 p.m. But notice it just sort of explodes here, and all of a sudden you start seeing the accumulations building. 2.2 inches at Squaw, 4 inches at Kirkwood. You can look at the stats, see it for yourself. We'll roll this out, and this is really cool because here's the different. You can sort of see where the snow level supposedly is. Now we've seen that this actually pushes the snow level down a bit, and this gray is not. It's really where the white starts, but still below Drum Forbre on 80 and Pollock Pines on 50. Accumulations building into Monday a.m. By Monday sunset, after sunset, we're talking supposedly 27 inches at Squaw, 30 at Kirkwood, 30 Bear Valley. Heavenly, of course, always getting a little bit less, 14, 20 at North Star. You sort of get the idea. Sugar Bowl, 26 inches. That's a good amount of accumulation. I-80, I'm sure, will be very rough going during that window. Anyway, get into Tuesday. Now, here's where things, notice the snow starts patching out, rain starts building in. Snow is just in these gray areas. Everything else is rain. We get into Tuesday, and odds are it's raining pretty much everywhere other than maybe Kirkwood later Tuesday. In the evening, it tries to build back a little bit, but then you get into by Wednesday, and it's rain and just continue. Oops, there we go. But supposedly, now I take these numbers with a grain of salt. Kirkwood, 86 inches of accumulation. Squaw, 47. You could say 4 feet at most of the North Shore resorts, and 30 plus. Bear Valley, 60 inches. Probably not that much. It's a bit low, but you get the general picture. You can use this chart to sort of map out what you're doing. We have charts like this also for Mammoth and some of the Pacific Northwest resorts, and for Colorado and Utah as well. So you can find these charts. See where it says models right here? Click those. Down here, the weather models. Scroll the whole way to the bottom, and right here are the snow forecasts. They're in 3-hour increments. There's also 3-hour wind increments. There's also 1-hour increment snow, and that only goes out 36 hours. And sometimes the data that we get from NOAA is a little bit jumbled. So we're working on it, but still, it's not as good as we like. And the wind seems to work okay though. So here's where they are. All right, let's look long term at the MJO, Madden-Julian Oscillation, and La Nina or not. As usual, we like to examine winds over the equatorial Pacific. West Pacific here, East Pacific here, New Guinea here, dateline right here. We're interested in what we call the Kelvin wave generation area. That area from 170 west, 5 degrees north and south, back to about 135 east. We're looking for the presence of either no wind or westerly winds. So actual wind speeds right now are from the east the whole way across the equator. But anomalies, differences in normal from this time of year, suggest easterly anomalies here on the dateline into the Kelvin wave generation area. That would suggest the inactive phase of the MJO. So that typically the inactive phase of the MJO supports the splitting of the jet stream north of that region. So we're at the dateline, a split north of there. But when you go to the active phase, the MJO anomalies turn to the west or go calm, and then the jet stream, the strength of the consolidated jet stream starts pushing its way off to the east. And based on what we saw in the models, it looks, one would theorize that the active phase is on its way over the next week. So next we look for zonal wind anomalies. This is the forecast, but it also this is a nice chart because it shows you what's been going on over all January into early February. Here's current time right here. Oranges and red are westerly anomalies. Kelvin wave generation area between this tick mark and this tick mark. Here's the date line running right down here. And you can see as of right now, a lot of easterly anomalies right on the date line into the Kelvin wave generation area. But in the far west Pacific, a lot of westerly anomalies starting to develop. And here's the forecast. You can see they start encroaching almost reaching the date line, not quite. There's this battle going on between the inactive phase of the MJO and the active phase. What really the battle is between the remnants of La Nina, which are hanging right around in this area that are slowly fading. And when they fade, the expectation is the active phase of the MJO will then finally this winter be able to make some serious progress with westerly anomalies fully into the Kelvin wave generation area, and that should really goose up the jet stream and help support storm development and swell production. Looking at the MJO forecast charts, the statistic model here, this is where the active phase is, the blues. That suggests less sunlight reflectivity. Notice negative numbers here, meaning more clouds, meaning the active phase of the MJO. The inactive phase of the MJO, the one that splits the jet stream, is sitting here just south of Hawaii, according to this. The actual effect on the jet is further back here. Anyway, so here we go, initial date, but a week out. Notice the active phase of the MJO pushing to the date line and holding pretty steady. And actually, this is an upgrade from a couple days ago. This model never suggested the active phase making it this far nor this strong, while the inactive phase builds in the Indian Ocean. We go down here to the dynamic model, and it is even a stronger picture, suggesting the active phase making more progress 2 weeks out, basically on the date line. So again, the theory is that at this time the jet stream should be raging, probably making it the actual split point being somewhere between Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. Storm production on the date line should be enhanced, and we should start seeing some maybe more serious, longer period swells than what we've been seeing for the past few weeks, and that would be a good thing if one believes this model. Looking at other models, phase diagram chart. So assume you're looking down on the North Pole of our planet. The active phase of the MJO moves, or the MJO for that matter, moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean over the maritime continent, Bali, over the date line into the West Pacific, underneath the U.S., into the Atlantic, over top of Africa, and back to the Indian Ocean. Time period typically over the Pacific is about 3 to 4 weeks, something along that lines. The active phase right now, right here where the big dot is, we'll say that's not even at the date line, far west Pacific, somewhere like that. And over the next 2 weeks is supposed to make good progress. And notice the further away from this circle it is, the stronger it is. So let's say a good mid-strength active phase of the MJO traversing the Pacific over the next 2 weeks. This would be the first real one that has showed up on these charts this winter so far. The GEFS model suggests even more strength to it and building here in the West Pacific dateline region. That would be even better, certainly for Hawaii for a storm production and a more distant swell pattern for the U.S. West Coast, but probably still pretty significant. So that data looks good as well. And yet one more model, our trusty CFS model, up at 850 millibar winds, up about 4,200 feet. Good representation of what's going on down at the surface. Okay, here's current time. Past time is down here. Date line right there. Kelvin wave generation area, roughly between these two tick marks, running right up here. You can see the battle, current time between the blues, that's easterly anomalies, westerly anomalies in the far west Pacific. We'll overlay the MJO, and here we go, the inactive phase of the MJO, and Kelvin wave generation right in here, supposed to die out in, let's say, the next week. Then a pretty decent active phase of the MJO is forecast. Still, it doesn't quite stomp out the easterly anomalies. Westerly anomalies still trying to make some headway. We're going to do this here, low pass filter. Here's the La Nina right here, right over the date line. When it's early in its life, it's more back here in the West Pacific. And notice also by mid to late March, it's supposed to be gone. Here is what we'll call El Nino, if you will, but it's not El Nino when you're in this pattern. It's in the Indian Ocean. But notice it's starting to build over the dateline Kelvin wave generation area come April. We'll see if that happens. It's a bit of a tease. Anyway, something to look forward to. Inactive phase of the MJO forecast moving in late February-ish or so. But notice underneath that right there, westerly anomalies starting to build into the Kelvin wave generation area. That's part of this low pass thing where this guy's dying and the we'll call it the El Nino sort of phase starts building at the same time. Anyway, as you move beyond, don't know if any of this data is real. Westerly anomalies supposedly building, associated, of course, with this guy right here. And notice all these blues here have been associated with La Nina, and with the death of La Nina in month and a half, 2 months, then we might be moving back towards an El Nino-like pattern. So the short is, all the models are pretty much in agreement. Active phase of the MJO coming, maybe a little bit of a storm cycle to result for the central Pacific Ocean. Next up, we look at subsurface ocean temperatures. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Warm water hold up here in the far West Pacific. 28-degree isotherm line on the date line. Notice little pockets of warm water trying to make a little bit of eastward progress here, trying to push the depth of warm water, make it a little bit deeper here in the east. But typical of La Nina, very shallow warm water pool. Most of the depth is in the West Pacific, driven by easterly winds and easterly anomalies, driven by, of course, La Nina. Anyway, anomalies, differences, normal this time of year. Notice a little bit of what NOAA has been hitting at as a Kelvin wave, but it just doesn't make any eastward progress. It's stuck here right at, where is that? 165, 170 west. So just east side of the date line. Little pocket of cool water here, 1 degree below normal. But basically, La Nina is all but dead. Notice some warm anomalies building here off of Ecuador, and a shallow pool of warmish or at least neutral water. Basically, things pretty normal looking here. No clear signs of either El Nino or La Nina, homogeneous water pattern across the bulk of the Pacific Ocean. Another model of the same sort of data suggests here's that semi-Kelvin wave, if you will, making it to 160 west. A little finger of warmish water almost making it to Ecuador. A little pocket of cool water here, a little pocket here south of Hawaii at depth. But really, looking more like a warm flow is starting to build to the east. That is good news. That certainly signals the death of La Nina. We don't want to say El Nino's coming because that seems just crazy, but certainly a return to a normal subsurface water pattern temperature. Upper ocean heat anomalies, upper 300 meters of the ocean. You can just this sort of puts things in perspective. back a year ago, February, the last Kelvin wave associated with El Nino back then. The onset of La Nina in the May-June time frame of 2016. Cooler waters rushing to the east, hanging, again, westward displaced here, south of Hawaii, not really making any headway towards Ecuador. And then here in November, they started fading into December. And now look at this, warm water building almost to the Galapagos now, and not looking like they're giving up any ground at all. Zero is somewhere between yellow and this light pale blue, and we're moving towards the warmer end of that spectrum, but still basically a return to normal, the death of La Nina imminent. Actual surface water temperatures now. If you were in La Nina, you'd expect to see cool water off of Peru being driven by easterly anomalies, working their way over the Galapagos and out this way. We see none of that. Instead, we're seeing this dark shade of red is 2¼ degrees or better. Now, the coverage of those super warm anomalies has faded some in the past week. Still, rather impressive. No signs of cool water off of Ecuador right here or over the Galapagos, and they're pushing the whole way to 115, we'll say 120 west, maybe even more than that, almost out to south of Hawaii. And the La Nina cool pool is pretty much confined to 150 west and beyond, at least per this chart. That's pretty impressive. One would almost look at this and go, El Nino is coming back. And maybe so, but it seems kind of hard to believe. There isn't that much warm water at depth to support any of this. But whatever, we'll take it right now because that means La Nina is for sure gone. And the trend. Now, we did see warming trend here off of Peru and Ecuador. That's fading a little bit. Still warm, but most of it now is pushing from the Galapagos out to a point. Well, there's Hawaii there. Not quite south of Hawaii, but right in there. So that suggests, if nothing else, it's just like a pulse that's coming to wipe out La Nina, clear it off the books, and just reset us back to a normal ocean surface temperature pattern. The last couple little pockets of cooling here and there, but really they're almost meaningless at this point. Now again, this is only the 7-day trend. Here's actual water temperatures sort of backed off, so you see the broad view. Warming for sure along Peru, Galapagos, Ecuador, up into some of Central America. The last of the La Nina cool pool always has been westward displaced, confined to this spot south of Hawaii, and pretty much from, I'll say, 130 west out to about 170 east. That's where it is. This warm water, as the trades start blowing it east, they're just going to start digging into this and wiping whatever's left of it out over the next coming couple of weeks into a month or so. And now whether this will actually turn into anything that is El Nino, well, we'll see. We're going to look at some data here in a second that will tease us certainly, but it's way too early to believe any of it. And then finally, we've talked about the MJO forecast. We've talked about subsurface temperature data, and that helps us know what's going on with La Nina and El Nino, kind of a neutral thing going on. We've looked at surface data. It almost looks like we're trending towards El Nino. And then you want to look at the atmosphere above that, because ultimately that's what drives like the jet stream, and that's what drives storm production. Whatever happens in the ocean, it follows in the atmosphere, but it takes 2 or 3 months to get there. So there's always this lagging factor going on. Anyway, Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Negative numbers for a long run suggest the active phase of the MJO. Positive numbers, and we're up at 26.23 today, suggest the inactive phase of the MJO. So per the atmosphere, according to this, at least in the past 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 days, let's say, we're in an inactive state. But the 30-day average is really where it sort of sorts out the noise and gives you a better sense of what's going on. We were in the inactive phase here in January, but then look at this. We're starting to dip into negative numbers, a little bit of a lag here, but it would suggest maybe the active phase is trying. 90-day running average, we were slightly negative. We're up to 0.88 today. Suggests basically hanging around neutral, so neither La Nina nor El Nino. Here's the 30-day Southern Oscillation Index graphed out. Of course, you see here these downward spikes like here, 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 here. These are the active phase of the MJO, and here's where we are today. Notice we're dipping, suggesting the active phase of the MJO might actually be trying to make a show. Also notice here, good correlation here. In October into November, big active phase of the MJO. Now, we never saw it in the winds in the Kelvin wave generation area, but it showed up here in the 30-day average. And remember, lots of swell the month of November in California. So this trend suggests maybe the same thing is setting up, starting to build. We'll see. Of course, here, this was back in January 2015, El Nino. Then the push into La Nina. And now, notice, we were above the line for the most part in this region. Now we're starting to drop below the line. Let's see if we get down somewhere in here and stay there for any length of time. If we can do that, that would suggest that, in fact, maybe some sort of a weak El Nino is returning. And this is an interesting chart. The red peaks up here suggest the strength, relative strength of the active phase of the MJO. No correlation as to where that's occurring. But anyway, and this is back 2013, 2014. 2016 during our, and 2015 during our El Nino, notice big spikes. And then we started falling into the La Nina, the MJO, not nearly as strong as it was back here. And then here's where we are right now. Just recently, we're starting to suggest the active phase is sort of waking up, coming alive. Again, not any stronger than anything earlier in 2016, but at least something, a push in the right direction. Then finally, another atmospheric indicator, the ESPI index. Current value last 30 days, minus 1.14. That suggests less rain in this region right here. In fact, here are the regions that are monitored. This area, like the Southern Oscillation Index, north of Darwin, Australia, then also north of Tahiti. It's really this, the more rainfall you have here, and that's right over top of where you used to typically monitor El Nino, that would send this index positive, and that's what we want to see. Negative numbers mean less rainfall here, meaning La Nina. This is sort of a lagging indicator. But the good news is we were at, last week I think it was minus 1.2. Now we're down to minus 1.14. We want to see this fade and get into the at least minus a half or something like that. Then we'll know we're making good progress away and the final death of La Nina from a rainfall perspective in this area. But again, the atmosphere lags behind the ocean, and the ocean just kind of woke up the past couple of weeks, so it'll be a couple months we expect before this returns to normal. And then finally, the forecast for the Nino 3.4 region, that same region between 120 west, 170 west, the main area for monitoring the presence of El Nino or La Nina. So as of January 2017, we were officially neutral from a surface water temperature perspective. The forecast as we move into February is up and up. When we get into April, we're up at plus 3/4 of a degree, hanging there into July, and then up in even in July we're up to supposedly up a degree above normal and going up from there. That seems rather far-fetched. Now also notice the big El Nino that we were at was above 2.5 degrees above normal back in 2015. So if this were to happen, it would be a rather weak El Nino. But this would definitely, if we're even a half degree or better, bodes very well for the fall of this coming year, 2017. So we're looking months and months out into the future. But some sort of a weak El Nino, it'd probably be like a Madoki kind of El Nino thing. Who knows what it'll really be, if it even materializes. But anything like that is better than La Nina from a swell production standpoint. And actually, given that we've been in La Nina this entire winter, there's been some moments of surf. Nothing epic, but there have been there have been moments. And so, it could have been a lot worse. We could have been in a super El Nino. It could have been a lot colder, the water temperature, that is. It could have been all up against Ecuador, which it wasn't. It was all westward. This was a westward displaced, like a Modoki La Nina. So it was a pretty wimpy La Nina as far as La Ninas go. And then to go into anything that is even a weak El Nino after that, it's all a gift at this point. So looking pretty good, looking optimistic at the moment. So the quick wrap up, jet stream forecast to strengthen, forecast to remain consolidated, pushing further to the east, building storm pattern forecast, the active phase of the MJO supposedly building, hopefully ramping up storm production, probably a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, and then of course long term. Maybe the return of some sort of a weak El Nino. Certainly, as of right now, the death of La Nina, it's all but over other than the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a big boat, just takes a while to turn. The ocean has already decided La Nina's gone, so the atmosphere will return, will respond in kind. It'll just take a couple of months. So for now, and of course, it looks like snow for the Sierra, weather for the Sierra, at least for a week, but then high snow levels and probably rain at some point. So sort of a mixed bag. That's all right. All rain is good for California. So that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.